This is Austin Liti Limits, where authors talk to authors about books and the craft of storytelling. Sponsored by Blue Ink Review, because typing the end is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com.
In this episode, we talk to author Thomas H. McNeely. An Eastside Houston native, Thomas has received fellowships for his fiction from the National Endowment for the Arts and Dobie Paisano. His stories have been shortlisted for the Pushcart Prize and the O. Henry Award. He currently teaches in the Stanford Online Writing Studio and at Emerson College in Boston. Pictures of the Shark is his latest book, which received a star from Kirkus Reviews. Welcome to the show, Thomas H. McNeely.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So I read your new book, Pictures of the Shark. Excellent short story collection. And I had an opportunity to see you at your book launch at Malvern Books here in Austin. And so that was really great. I got to hear you read and talk about your book. Many of these stories appeared in various literary journals over the years, probably a pretty long period of time. How did you go about compiling these stories into this collection?
Well, there many of them, as you know, many of them are about the character Buddy Turner, and well, all of them are about the character Buddy Turner. Most of them are from his point of view. And I was writing, I think I've talked about this in other contexts. I was writing what I could figure out how to write about that character at a particular time. So I was trying to figure out, how do I write about him right from the perspective of a 6-year-old child? How do I write from the perspective of a 9-year-old child? And there were stories that I wanted to tell, but I think the process of writing them also had to do with figuring out how to write from those viewpoints from those different ages.
Right.
I don't know whether that's a responsive answer or not.
No, that's great. You know, I had a similar challenge with my last novel, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island. It takes place in the 80s, but when I was writing that book, I chose not to write from the perspective of the time period. I was looking back with this character being a lot older. And one of the fun things for me is that this character, as well as myself, the time period of the 80s is still very vivid to me. So the details were very clear, but I enjoyed looking back on, as the perspective of looking back rather than trying to live inside the character as a 12-year-old.
Right.
Because I felt like there was more depth with the wisdom that was just kind of there with the character being older, rather than just going through the story as it's happening at that particular time, because like you're saying, it's difficult to kind of talk the story from a perspective of a child and be interesting. Right.
Yes. Right.
So what were some of the challenges of you writing as a 6-year-old, or trying to write from that perspective?
That was really one of them. Was I was trying to stay faithful to the characters understanding at the time the story was happening, and yet make the story accessible to and engaging to an older reader. And one of the lessons a teacher of mine, Pamela Painter, gave me that sticks with me is that she said, if you're writing from the perspective of a child for an adult audience, you're writing an adult story. It
Right.
has to be, even if it is from the child's perspective, it has to be engaging the adult's interest, and there has to be an awareness of the adult world from that character's perspective. And that kind of double perspective, I suppose, it was a challenge, and it was a challenge also to stay within the perspective of the characters and not to go beyond what the character might be able to realize or learn at that particular time.
Right.
There's only one story in the collection that is from a reminiscent point of view, and that is the teenage story that when the Buddy character is a teenager, Ariel, and that reminiscent perspective is very lightly applied
Right.
in the story. So so yes, I think it works very well in your novel. I was I guess I'm more of a miniaturist, or I was interested in what the character would be able to realize at that time.
Right. Yeah, I think if I think of your stories as set pieces, then I think I enjoyed Ariel followed by King Elvis as like a combo, because Ariel's told in first person, but he's older. King Elvis is told in third person, but he's younger. And it was very fascinating to me as a writer to kind of, and I'm sure it was for you to write it, to kind of observe this character and then have the character observing. It's so fascinating. It's like if you had someone film you and you're watching yourself walk is different than how you think you're walking down the street. It's an interesting experiment, and I really enjoyed reading those two together because it really explains a lot about Buddy.
Right. I that was those shifts in perspective, or the juxtapositions, were something obviously that came out of arranging the here's my cat, arranging the stories in the non-chronological order
Right.
in which they were eventually arranged. It was not something I was thinking of so much when I was writing the book, but I'm very pleased with the way that it worked in the book. I think it gives you kind of an arc of this character in a way that would be very difficult to do in a novel.
Right.
So I was very pleased with that effect.
So Buddy also appeared in your novel Ghost Horse. So were some of these stories, were they remnants from that project, or are they separate? Were they something that you did outside of writing Ghost Horse?
They were very separate pieces. I'd written I'd written most of the stories in the first that in the younger stories, the stories where Buddy is younger. I think all of them I'd written before I started writing that book.
Okay.
And the book actually started as a short story that wouldn't be contained within the short story form. And and then when I was finished with the book, uh, I wanted to follow the character a little further, and so that's how it came together.
Right.
Uh,
Would you consider Buddy to be like an alter ego of yours? You had mentioned at Malvern that some of the stories were somewhat autobiographical, and I have some more questions about that. But would you consider him kind of like an alter ego of Thomas McNeely?
uh, in as much as any character that you write about yourself is an alter ego. Um, there, when I was writing the novel, I think because it was such a, as you know, it's a much longer narrative, and there are more, the characters have to do more. And it it became very clear to me that if I was only thinking of this character in terms of what I would do, then I was really kind of paralyzed.
Right.
And that is true in the stories as well. I mean, there are situations certainly that are autobiographical, but the character is quite different
Right.
from me.
Yeah, I find that to be pretty fascinating because, one of the cliches is that people ask a writer, well, what in here is true? Who are these characters based on? And it almost seems like people want to know if there's like a grievance that a writer may have, where in reality, at least for me, I don't know about you, but sometimes there's like more of a feeling during a certain period, and I'm trying to explore that feeling, which isn't something that seems to be as interesting when you tell people that, if, well, I was dealing with the situation and I felt this way and I want to explore that rather than this character is XYZ, you know.
Well, not to insult readers, but that the idea that the character a character in a book is somebody in reality is a very naive way of thinking about characters in a
Right.
book. A character in a book, no matter how complex they are, is not, you can't reproduce the complexity of a human being in a book. Um, so there's that. But I see what you're saying, yes, of trying to think through or explore a time is also how I was approaching these stories. Um, Stories, I think, or fiction, are these sort of moral laboratories where you set up your experiment and see what the result is. And I think what I was interested in the stories and in the book was how do people learn to efface themselves or to create false consciousness, to play roles, or to put it really kind of bluntly, how is evil created?
Right.
Uh, and that, in a way, was much more interesting to me, and what kept me writing the book, those stories, than any autobiographical aspects of the of the stories. And you might say, well, I mean, of course, those questions originated in my experience, but the way they're worked out in the stories is quite different from how
Right.
they were worked out in experience.
Right. Yeah, I definitely understand that concept of, well, let's say I want to explore a period in my life and write about it, but then it morphs and changes into something else. It's never like, well, there's this tick, 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 and it happened, and these things happen. It's not, something that's laid out historically. There's like this thing. It's like a vision that happened to you in a particular time, and then it's never what it was. It turns into something different.
Absolutely. I mean, if sometimes my students will say to me, well, that's how it happened, as a defense for a piece of fiction. And that's never that's never a defense for a piece of fiction. I mean, if we're I think the reason that people write fiction and the people that reason that people read fiction is that you're there's an order in those fictional worlds, no matter how seemingly chaotic, that you don't have in real life. I mean, if you want to experience real life, go out and experience real life.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a confidence in your writing, like a really grounded self assuredness, I would say. What's your relationship to revision? Were these stories just kind of like molded over and over and over, or did they come out pretty fully formed as they are? What's your relationship to revision with these stories?
They were all such different processes. Um, the I think the easiest story for me to write was No One's Trash. It was really based around a memory that I have of a day when a hurricane came, that I was also aware, even as I was writing the story, that I was kind of rearranging things to make a better story. And I don't want to question I'll just believe that it happened that way.
Right.
But that was definitely the one that came out most easily. And I think it was also the easiest to write because I was using a version of my mother's voice to narrate the story, and that kind of carried it along. Um, but there were stories in there like Hester and Ariel that I worked on and off for years. And there were stories like King Elvis that I kept kind of coming back to and revising over time. Um, and the Tickle Torture and Snow Houston 1974, which I believe are the first ones that I wrote chronologically. were the product of a great deal of revision and uh, development over time. And I was very lucky to be Pamela Painter's student when I was revising those stories. So but it was very different. It was very different process for each one. And I mean, I don't know whether this is your experience as well, but if I think that, oh, I figured this thing out and I'm going to just whip off this story now, that is when I know I'm in trouble.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, this is the time in the show where we do the lightning round. It's 10 questions. It's a concept we stole from inside the actor's studio, but it's not their concept because they stole it from Bernard Pivot, who stole it from Marcel Proust. So, Thomas H. McNeely, are you ready for the lightning round?
I am ready, Scott.
Okay, what is your favorite word?
Ubiquitous.
Ooh, nice.
Today, my favorite word is ubiquitous.
What is your least favorite word?
Oh, uh, yolk.
There you go. What turns you on?
Good music, like Texas blues music. I'm a big fan of Lightning Hopkins, and who played in the neighborhood where near where I grew up. Food.
Yeah,
I
of
was
course.
in Houston, and the Houston is the food's just terrific there now.
Yeah, they have good food in Houston. So
And
what
of
turned you off?
course, a good book that also turns me on.
Excellent. So what turned you off?
Greg Abbott.
Oh, we'll leave it at that one then. Okay, what is your idea of happiness?
My idea of happiness is to have a family nearby, and to have time to create. That's what I like to do, and to teach. I love teaching.
Excellent. So who is your favorite author?
Right now, my favorite author, it's a toss-up. Alice Munro is a big favorite. I'm also a big fan of an Australian writer named Gerald Murnane,
Okay.
who's pretty weird. Those and Joy Williams. Joy Williams, I think, is maybe the greatest living American writer.
Excellent. So if you could be a character of a well-known novel, who would that be?
I thought about this question, Scott, and I I don't think I would like to be any character in a novel. However, I would like to meet some novelists.
Okay.
I would like to meet Joyce, although I'm sure he would be really obnoxious and drunk. But
Right.
I would still like to meet Joyce, Proust, and I'd like to meet Alice Munro. I suppose that's still possible.
That is possible. What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
My grandfather was a lawyer, and I've always fancied that perhaps I could I could do that, but I think I'd probably be a very bad lawyer because I can't tell the difference between fiction and reality a lot of the time. That's not a good trait in a lawyer.
Right. So what profession would you least want to do?
A doctor.
Hmm.
My father was a doctor, and it is too much responsibility.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
You don't owe me anything. No debts, no purgatory. You're free and clear. You can go.
Excellent. All right, Thomas H. McNeely, excellent book, Pictures of the Shark. Please go pick it up at your favorite indie bookstore. Thanks for being on our show.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of Austin Liti Limits, made possible with help from our good friends at Blue Ink Review, where typing the end is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com.